Greetings to you all again. The four of us are gathered round our dining room table now, ready to make a tape recording showing you slides that we have taken during 1964. Our holiday season began with the children's program at church. Number 2 shows a little closer view of Keith in the choir. This was a very important part of our church program last year. Dean, what are you doing there?
Opening up packages.
And you had so many nice things to open up last Christmas, didn't you? We see Keith in the background there with the light reflecting in his glasses a bit. But we really had a nice Christmas Eve, didn't we?
My Thingatron was a very nice gift. All of the children that come to my house want to play with it, and I have a lot of fun with it myself. And it's a big education. You can get more answers for it, too.
This is the view Santa Claus had when he left his packages for Dean. One tired-out boy, too exhausted to take off his stockings, but wearing the new pajamas from Grandma and Grandpa. Number 6, Dean, what are you doing there?
Open up my stocking sack.
Yes, with all your presents from Santa Claus. Wasn't that fun?
Yes.
Here we see the brothers comparing notes. Yes, it was another wonderful Christmas, thanks to you all at home. In January, Keith had a birthday party with some of his friends. They went to the movies first, and then they came back home, and here we see them opening up the packages. I inserted this picture to show the Copenhagen oil painting that we gave each other for Christmas. Mother and Dad will recognize the stock exchange and Christiansborg Castle in the background. In February, the Danish people celebrate a holiday called Fastelavn. It's very much like our Halloween, where the children dress up in costumes. They also decorate twigs to use in hitting the witches. In between Fastelavn and Dean's birthday, I went to the hospital for surgery. The boys could visit me here, so on Sunday, on the way home from church, they stopped in, and Daddy snapped our picture. Dean in his Bernhaven with his 2 birthday cakes, which were needed to feed all the children. Can you tell them about it, Dean?
Well, I went to the cake there, and then I saw a clown, and then I couldn't call about my little
What's your girlfriend's name?
Louisa.
Louisa. Does she talk any English?
A little.
A little, My, she's a pretty girl. And you're cutting the cake.
Yeah.
Very good. There I see Louisa by you at the table too, Dean. I see the Danish flag is set by the birthday child. Earlier in the day, Dean was lifted up on a chair high in the air and carried around a big flag while the children sang Danish and American Happy Birthday. The Coles were our family that night. Their 4 children each gave Dean a package, and so he had 3 cakes for this year, 2 at Bernhaven and 1 that night. Carol and Susan are helping Dean open a package. What does it look like, Dean?
Look like the clown from Grandma and Grandpa.
Yes, and you had such a good time with that, don't you? And you still do, because it lights up your room every night. As you can see, we have the tape recorder running, as we were doing a recording to send home to you. Who do you see here, Dean?
Wanda and me and my go-kart.
Yeah, that was what you got for your birthday, wasn't it?
Yes.
You couldn't go outside and ride it yet, so you were enjoying it in the living room. In April, I was busy getting ready for the FALCO conference. That is the Federated American Women's Club of Europe, who met in Copenhagen. Our club celebrated a very important birthday at the same time with a lovely luncheon. At the end of April, we started off on our 3-week drive to Rome. Most of the following slides deal with this trip. Wanda stayed at home with Johnny, and we started off very early one morning. We ferried first to Germany, And then we drove the Autobahn to a town called Bad Hirschfeld, where we spent the first night. I have to tell you a little story about Dean. He and I had to sleep together in the one room, and I was anxious for him to get to sleep so that I could get to work on doing some mending and so on, and writing some letters. So I said, "Go to sleep." He replied so matter-of-factly, "I will, but it takes time." This is a typical farm scene as we drove from our hotel in Bad Hirschfeld to the highway and headed south to Frankfurt. The countryside here is very beautiful, with hills, trees, and picturesque villages dotting the area.
Since I had grown up on a farm and worked on a farm when I was younger, I was interested in some of the ways that the Germans used to farm. They farm very small plots as a family, and their power is very often oxen. Here we had a picture of a family in the field plowing with their oxen. They're looking after their orchards here.
This is the typical German village that I mentioned previously, north of Frankfurt. Everyone recommended the castle at Heidelberg, so we spent several hours going through it. It was a tremendous piece of architecture, the ruins of it anyway, on top of a very high hill. The castle was used as far back as 1303. In the cellar of this castle is a great vat. It is the largest wine barrel in the world, holding 55,000 gallons of wine. This town of Heidelberg is famous for bell casting and wood carvings. The University of Heidelberg is located here too, and that is the oldest in Germany. We heard that there was an A&W root beer stand in the town, and we were most anxious to get some for the boys, but we weren't able to find it. This area of Germany is truly Little America, for there are army vehicles and signs of the USA everywhere. By late afternoon, we had reached the border of Germany near Basel. There is much grape production here. We were amazed at how primitive the farming is, as Al mentioned previously, using the oxen and so on. But here was our first glimpse of grapes growing. Basel, Switzerland was very French-looking in architecture and the people. Keith and I went to see a movie that night that had subtitles in German and French. There was hardly room for the picture. Number 24 shows us coming into the mountains, which was very exciting. The boys stopped to look through the binoculars so they could get a very good view of things way off into the hills. This is a scene in Switzerland near Lucerne. The residential area outside of Lucerne had lovely chalet-type houses. These places were overlooking the lake. This is a typical Swiss village nestled in the hills with the mountains in the background. The Swiss farms were different in that the barns are attached to the houses. They're very neat and clean everywhere. These are some farm animals in a little Swiss farm. This covered bridge was an oddity for us. We walked through it a bit and took this picture along the way. In this same Swiss town, there was a lovely monastery high up on the hill. The people were just coming from church as we came through. It looked as though more people went to church here than they do in Denmark. The towns were all very clean and very colorful. This is a town in the middle of Switzerland. A surprise to us in this little town tucked away in the mountains was this statue of William Tell. The boys are standing in front of it. The gumball machines, they haven't had them since they were in the States, and of course every place we went, they rushed over to them. It is not possible at that time of year to drive through the Gotthard Pass, so we put our car on a railroad train and went through a tunnel. We sat in the car for about 20 minutes. Is that right, Al? About 20 minutes? When we came out on the Italian side of the Alps, we felt like we were in a different world. The contrast in temperature, scenery, and people was breathtaking. The palm trees and the rock houses with the stone roofs, as you can see in front of our car, was quite a change from the other side of the mountains. You'll notice how the land looks more barren and rocky here. This is a typical village on the Italian side. This slide and the one to follow were two interesting houses. This is a bit Swiss in design, whereas this one, very close to the other one actually, has a more Roman appearance to it. Number 44 shows Keith in front of a Roman wall that was dividing a town on the Italian side of the Alps. This is still Switzerland, too, by the way. This is the wall, another view of it.
The Romans built these walls across the valley so that they would slow any troops coming down from the north.
As we drove south to Lugano, the people became less dark, which surprised us since we were nearing Italy. The northern Italians were not as dark as the Swiss, and they were a much larger people. We loved Lugano, which was a real paradise of palm trees, lakes, and mountains. Number 48 is a picture of Al and the boys at a particularly beautiful spot overlooking the lake. A short 2-hour drive from Lugano brought us to the Italian border, which presented another contrast. Everything was quite dirty and very poor. Little did we know that this was the best part of Italy, and the worst was yet to come. Al is still interested in farming, and here we have a typical Italian farm scene, with the umbrella trees in the background, Al says. The rice farming was a novelty to us. There were many fields of water like this with the rice and the oxen plowing through. Pay-as-you-go autostrada was the best way to make time through Italy, as the side roads were very bad. The Egypt motels and the restaurant like this are very nice and very reasonable in Italy. The Italian cemeteries were quite different. There were big buildings like this with family plots. The pictures of the people that were buried were something different to us, so we snapped a picture of it. And here are the vaults with the crypts in them. They were very careful about keeping up their graves. Also, there were fresh flowers everywhere. In order to get to Pisa from Milan, we drove across the Apennine Mountains. They weren't as high as the Alps, but the roads are very narrow and cluttered with trucks and little bugs passing wherever they pleased. After 3 hours of this, we were exhausted by the time we arrived at La Spezia. Number 61 shows you a picture of the Italian Riviera. This is a view of La Spezia, or the Riviera also, from up above. It was a very lovely area, but we couldn't find a place where we would like to spend any time. We thought maybe we'd like to go swimming, but there didn't seem to be much of that type of thing in this area. Here is Dean, right in front of the car where we had our breakfast. Pisa gave us our first real taste of the marvelous Italian cathedrals, paintings, and souvenir shops. Here Keith began his quest for the marble statues. It amazed us how quickly he transferred from German marks to Swiss francs to Italian lira. At $625 to $1 does take a little thinking. And we still tend to think in terms of Danish kroner a bit, too. But he was bargaining at his best in no time. What were the statues that you bought at Pisa, Keith?
I started with Michelangelo, and then I got Galileo.
Number 66 is the general view as we saw it when we arrived, showing the Duomo, the Tower of Pisa, which is really a bell tower, and the baptistry. We were surprised to see the immensity of the other buildings, thinking that all we were going to see was the Leaning Tower. The Leaning Tower was begun in 1174 by Pisano and was finished 99 years later. It leans 4.5 meters on its foundation, and the foundation is 3 meters deep. From the top, Galileo performed this experiment on gravity. We walked up the 3 flights around the edge with no railing, when the boys were scared and asked to go back. Some of our friends have gone all the way up, but it is the strangest feeling to be walking on something at that angle. This shows the boys standing in front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We saw many priests riding their bicycles along the highway, so I was very glad to be able to snap a picture of one walking, and especially to have the Leaning Tower in the background. This is a bought-in picture of the baptistry, which is a large building nearby. This shows some of the frescoes on the interior dome of the baptistry ceiling. Some marble sculpture that was particularly lovely in the Duomo. The Duomo is the same as the cathedral. Another shot of the interior of the cathedral at Pisa. As we drove down the coast from Pisa on our way to Rome, we noticed this man out carving a statue. We were truly in the marble country and began to appreciate it even more as we saw these things. This is a close-up of the artist with his statue and the boys. Across the road was a factory where they were starting to carve from a large piece of marble. Very excited we were to see the Pieta being packed for shipment. Slabs of marble like Michelangelo used when he carved his masterpieces 500 years ago. We drove steadily to reach Rome by that night. Washing hanging from the windows in the front of the apartment and the houses is very typical of Italy. Our pension was located in this building. There was no English spoken at all. We enjoyed lasagna and ice cream in a small cafe nearby. Numbers 81 and 82 show you some buildings in the EUR district of Rome. This is the area that Mussolini was responsible for. And our pension was also in this area. It was wonderful having the Russell Olsons nearby, who were there to help us when we needed it. The Olympics were held in this area in 1960. Our first day in Rome, and Dean, whose flags are those that we saw lining the streets of Rome? They're the Danish flags.
The Danish flag.
Yes, we were certainly surprised, but it was a special promotion for Danish foods and products that week. The Spanish Steps are a particularly lovely area with the flowers lining them. Keats, famous British author, died in the house to the very left of these steps. Number 85 gives you a close-up of the azaleas, I believe they were, with Al and the boys in front. We rode through the Borghese Gardens in a horse-driven carriage that evening. It was fun for us all. Notice the carriage lamps on the sides, Grandma. Here we come to a very special place in Rome. Keith, can you tell us where this is?
Well, this is the Forum, and it's very old. In that square is where Caesar was killed, and there's a lot of lizards running around. Dean and I ran after.
You spent more time looking for lizards, I'm afraid, than looking at the ruins. Number 88 is a spectacle of the Roman Forum again. This was a center of the Roman life in BC, the Republican era. These ruins were overwhelming, with pillars and rocks lying everywhere or standing alone. Number 89 is a closer view of the Senate building where Julius Caesar is supposed to have been stabbed. It is still in very good shape. Keith really had his eyes glued to the ground here. This area is several feet lower than the city surrounding it. The area around it is a busy thoroughfare with cars going in all directions. This area was a cow pasture for hundreds of years, but in the 19th and 20th centuries, they have been excavating it. We walked up to the top of the Palatine Hill for a better view of the Roman Forum. From here Romulus traced the boundary of original Rome, and in this palace also lived Cicero and Mark Antony. Augustus built his first imperial palace at this spot. The beautiful old gardens of the palace. After walking up steadily for half an hour, the soft drink stand at the top was a bit out of place but very welcome, and the boys are enjoying a glass of Coke, it looks like. Now, Dean, can you tell me what this building is called? Remember the Coliseum?
The Coliseum.
And what did you look for there?
Cats.
Cats, yeah, there are lots of them there at night, particularly, aren't they? The Colosseum was opened in 80 AD. It was named after the colossal statue of Nero that stood nearby. In this building, the fights between the gladiators took place, and also the early Christians were thrown to the wild beasts. There is a large cross inside in their memory. This is a shot of the boys with the Colosseum in the background. The interior of the Colosseum that at one time could seat 50,000 spectators. Number 96 is another shot of the Colosseum. Al says that the animals were kept underneath in cages. And you can just barely see us. It was getting late in the day when we took this picture, but this is the walls on the interior of the Colosseum as they stand today. An interesting part of Rome to us is that ruins are everywhere. This arch, right in the middle of town, is the Arch of Constantine. And it was built to celebrate Constantine's victory over somebody way back when. But the cars go through it, and it's just accepted as part of the city now. A general view of Rome with the Castle St. Angelo and St. Peter's in the background, the River Tiber in front. This is a better view of the Castle St. Angelo, or Hadrian's tomb, which is built on an island in the Tiber River, and it began construction in about 136 AD. It was used as a fort in the Middle Ages. The statues in front are by Bernini, who was a very famous Italian sculptor. A pyramid is located near St. Paul's Gate, and it is erected over the tomb of a Roman leader. The boys were very interested in this. Nearby is St. Paul's outside the walls basilica, which is built over the tomb of St. Paul. Here we see the interior of the St. Paul's outside the walls basilica. In the Basilica of St. Peter in chains, we saw the tremendous statue of Moses that was done by Michelangelo. The chains are also here that were supposed to have held St. Peter. Keith asked the guide about these horns.
In translating the Bible from the original Hebrew, the rays, which we sometimes see coming out of Moses' head, can also be translated as horns. And Michelangelo read the original Hebrew Bible, and he placed these horns to represent rays of light or power coming from the head of Moses.
This shows the Pantheon, which is one of the most perfectly preserved buildings of ancient Rome. It was built in 27 BC. Rome is very famous for its tremendous fountains. This is called the Bernini Fountain. This was one of the most beautiful buildings that we saw. It's called the Victor Emmanuel Monument, and it's a symbol of the unity of Italy. It contains the tomb of the unknown soldier. It is in a Greek and Italian styles. The steps were designed by Michelangelo. Now we're coming to the center of Christian Rome with the Basilica of St. Peter. Notice the large square in front. Now this is a view from behind the dome. It was created by Michelangelo and is the largest in the world. This is the interior of the dome that you just saw the outside of, and this is the work that was done by Michelangelo. The Basilica of St. Peter began in 324 AD when Constantine built a church over the spot where St. Peter had been martyred. This is the tomb of St. Peter. The center of the basilica is simply tremendous. There are statues everywhere and gold and beautiful, beautiful pictures. This is the view down one of the center aisles. Numbers 113 and 114 give you a view of the cathedral when the Catholic Church is in a council. As you can see, there was gold everywhere. And here we have the Pieta. As you know, it's not the original because at that time it was in New York City at the World's Fair. But this to us was a very impressive copy. The Vatican City is the smallest state in the world. It is completely independent and even has its own stamps, money, railways, and radio stations. Besides the cathedral that you have just seen, it also has a large museum. And this is the Sistine Chapel. It is used for conclaves. The left wall paintings depict the life of Moses. On the right wall, we see the life of Jesus. The ceiling is a tremendous work of frescoes that was done by Michelangelo. And to think that he had to lay on his back for 4 years to do this painting. This is one of the frescoes from the ceiling, showing Michelangelo's conception of the creation of Adam by God. This is the end wall, which is a tremendous piece of work also. It is the Last Judgment, painted by Michelangelo. We walk through the museum to see tremendous paintings by Raphael and very famous sculptures. And here are some of them that we saw as we walked along. Notice the Roman bathtubs in the center of the hallway. Al says that they were famous for taking baths, and some even took as many as 5 a day. This is a piece of Greek sculpture that was pointed out by our guide, and this is a very famous one. Can you remember the details of it, Al? It is called the Laocoon, and it represents a father and 3 sons who were thrown to the serpents in Greek mythology. On Friday, we headed south for Pompeii. Al spotted the famous Monte Cassino on the hill, the scene of a brutal battle between the Germans who occupied the abbey and the Americans and Polish armies who climbed the hill. Our first view of Mount Vesuvius. This was the volcano whose eruption was responsible for the destruction of Pompeii in 79 AD. And this shows the present townspeople in Pompeii itself, the present Pompeii, coming from church. Notice the narrow streets. This woman is selling produce, and it could be anything from fruits and vegetables to bread. The people let down a bucket from the upper windows, and she loads up what they want, and that's the way they do their marketing for the day. Because the conditions were so bad, we returned to the main highway. Al was very apprehensive about stopping here because we'd heard stories about tourists being robbed in these areas. Sanitary conditions were pretty poor in this area. To our disappointment, Pompeii was closed because of the May 1st holiday. We spent an hour in an area like Yellowstone Park, only this was an active volcano. The ground was very spongy and hollow underneath. This is a volcanic lake. The Romans had sulfur steam baths in caves here. It was really very hot and a very, very bad sulfur odor to the area. The boys, of course, enjoyed seeing this after we had just been to see Pompeii and the Vesuvius volcano. So now we were actually walking in the center of a real one. From Naples to Rome, the highway was very dull. We passed about 100 carts like this, with families who had been working in the fields for the day. Of course, I couldn't resist this shop. I found some of the things in Copenhagen for just about the same price, but I bought a small bean pot just to have something from this area. This is called the Etruscan ware. On this trip also, south of Rome, we found the ruins of this Roman aqueduct. This was their means of transporting water in the old days. Saturday morning, we went to see the Appian Way, which is called the Way of Tombs. This is the tomb of the wife of one of Caesar's generals in Gaul. Notice the old Roman road that is just as it was hundreds of years ago. Now we're going through one of the catacombs. This is up in the churchyard. The boys are having a drink of water in the old well before we go down underneath. We are down in one of the larger tombs of the catacombs. You can see that Dean stayed very close to us here. 145 shows how the bodies were laid in the catacombs. The temperature down there was amazingly warm and dry because of its being hewn out of the volcanic rock. These areas were usually used for burial places more so than for hiding. Here we see their chapel that was used for their meeting place in those days. It was very interesting, and it really brought the Bible very close to us to see these religious symbols that were carved into the rock everywhere, things that we use today in our church services. Since we missed seeing Pompeii, we were advised to drive out 5 miles to an area called Ostia Antica, which was another buried city. It was a trading port for Rome. 100,000 people lived here at one time. It declined in the 4th century due to malaria and the silting up of the harbor. Here we're walking through the ruins. We climbed the stairs of a huge bathhouse, which was still in very good shape, and this gave us an excellent view of the entire area. Time out to rest in front of a large government building. Keith and Dean had fun looking for animals and rocks here too. We ended that afternoon with a swim at the nearby beach. We met an Italian family from New York. He was an opera singer, and they were spending a few months in Italy. Sunday in Rome was a memorable one, as we went on a picnic with Alice and Russell Olson, who are there with the FAO. They are friends of Irene and Dick, and here we are enjoying Alice's potato salad. The purpose of our drive that afternoon was to visit Tivoli, after which the Copenhagen Tivoli was named. This was a big villa or an estate of one of the very, very wealthy families in Italy at the time. As Al said, the area is composed of the very rich and the very poor, and this is an example of how the very rich lived at that time.
All of the water for these fountains is supplied by gravity. No pumps are necessary.
You have to admit they were pretty clever in those days, as you can see by this statue with the fountain arrangement. Alice had a chuckle over Keith's interest in this statue. Take a real close look now. This is an Etruscan village that was very near the Tivoli Villa. It's built on a hillside and very typical of the way their construction was handled. After 6 wonderful days in Rome and around, we headed north toward Florence. We were fascinated by the old walled Etruscan villages that were perched on top of high hills. Our destination was Florence, a city that was founded by the Romans about the 1st century BC. It won its art supremacy under the Medicis during the Renaissance. Lorenzo the Magnificent was the most important member of this banking family. He was a patron for many of the young artists. Michelangelo was one of his most famous students. The view of the city from the Piazzola Michelangelo is picture 158. Here we see the Ponte Vecchio, a very famous covered bridge over the River Arno. It was rebuilt in 1345. It is used now for shops that sell leather and jewelry, whereas at one time it was lined with butchers. During the war, the Germans destroyed all the other bridges in the town, but this one remained standing. We spent several hours going through the Uffizi galleries, seeing Rembrandts, Van Dycks, and so on. These pictures are by two famous artists. This one is by Raffaello. 161 is a Rubens. Outside this gallery was a long series of stands selling leather trinkets and marble statues. By now, Keith was an expert in dealing and really outdid himself. I think these men were a bit overwhelmed by his determination. He even had a ruler along to make sure that his busts were all the same size. If you have read The Agony and the Ecstasy, which is the life of Michelangelo, you will recall his speaking about the Duomo, or the cathedral. This is a picture of it in Florence. It is a magnificently harmonized building, and the polychrome effect of the white, green, and rose marble is very, very beautiful. Here we see the doors of the baptistry. It is called the Paradise Door by Michelangelo because he felt that they were beautiful enough to line the gates of paradise. This is the oldest building in Florence, and this door is made out of cast bronze. It took 27 years to make these biblical scenes. This is another scene of the cathedral showing the different colors of the marble. This building was begun in 1296. Palazzo Vecchio is a square where great historical and political events took place in Florence. There are many lovely statues in front of it, one of which you will see in the next picture. This is a copy of Michelangelo's David. We saw the original of this in another building. Here we have the interior of the Palazzo Vecchio. It is used as a museum now. The flowers were particularly lovely that day. In the basement of another building in Florence, off on a side street, we found the original David. It was a tremendous piece of work. Notice the detail in the hair, the eyes, and the hands. Then we visited the courtyard of the Medici Palace, where Michelangelo carved many of his famous statues. These young artists were kept in these homes, and they lived there and worked at the same time. We left Florence with regrets, as there was not time to see all that we would have liked. But we did see Michelangelo's home and church where he was buried. The straw market was fun for shopping, too. We passed a large lake between Florence and Venice. We arrived at Venice about dusk. Rather than haul our luggage on boats to the other side of the Grand Canal, we settled in a hotel with the car nearby. The boys were fascinated by the boats, especially the gondolas. Here is a gondola in action. The water was very clean when we were there, but later on in the year, with more tourists and the warm weather, it can get very dirty. In order to go shopping, we had to ride a boat down the Grand Canal. They even have boats that are like buses. This canal divides the city in two parts. It is flanked on either side by ancient and splendid palaces belonging to the Venetian families who competed for the most beautiful palaces on the Grand Canal. The mooring posts for the gondolas even have coats of arms. At night, it is like a fairyland, with striped poles, lights, and boats everywhere. These buildings are sinking about a half an inch every year. Here we have a church along the Grand Canal. How would you like to step out of church some Sunday into the water? After riding about 15 minutes on a local bus, we came to St. Mark's Square. This is the most beautiful square in the world, with palaces, cafes, and shops, plus the huge St. Mark's Church, the museum, and the Ducal Palace. Napoleon called it the most beautiful drawing room in Europe. We met a young American girl who was enjoying herself feeding the pigeons, so she shared some of her food with the boys, who also had a good time in St. Mark's Square. We took an elevator to the very top of the bell tower to give us this view of Venice with Dean. From the other side of the tower, we saw this picture of Venice. And notice what beautiful weather we've been having, especially this day. St. Mark's Church from above. In 828, two Venetian merchants brought the body of St. Mark to Venice from Alexandria, Egypt. 183 shows the interior of the cathedral. The marble floors were slanted due to the unsound foundation under all of this area, which is actually out in the sea. In St. Mark's Cathedral, there are numerous items of tremendous wealth, in addition to its treasury rooms, which contain much of the booty that was taken by the Venetians at Constantinople in 1204. One could spend a lifetime studying such a church as this. Here we have the baptistry in St. Mark's Cathedral. The frescoes on the dome in the basilica represent Christ in glory. It was a particularly beautiful piece of work. Truly a masterpiece of architecture and design is this Ducal Palace at St. Mark's Square. We bought a watercolor of this because to us it was a very, very lovely building, and we did take a tour of it also. It was a dwelling place for the highest judges of the time. This is some of the interior of the Ducal Palace. This is the rooms of the Collegio. Here we see the Senate Hall, which is a lovely, lovely room also. The paintings were particularly beautiful here. The palace was filled with frescoes, paintings, and statues, plus an arms museum of the 16th to 18th century. It also had a prison that did interest the boys. We walked over the Bridge of Sighs, where prisoners passed as they were led before their inquisitors at the palace. Because I was anxious to buy a hand-carved manger scene, we drove 25 miles out of our way to the home of the woodcarvers at St. Ulrich in the Dolomites of northern Italy. This is the town as we saw it, but prices were very high here too, about $5 for each piece. This Roman wooden statue in the town of St. Ulrich was interesting for us, so we snapped a picture of it. The old Roman road went through the town, leading up through the Brenner Pass. Driving was much easier in Austria than in Switzerland. We spent that night at Innsbruck. On our way to Salzburg, Austria, we passed through the southernmost tip of Germany, where Berchtesgaden is located. Seeing the U.S. Army Information Headquarters, we stopped. This is a recreation area for the services, so we pretended to be on vacation and enjoyed American coffee at U.S. prices and wieners and buns. We also signed up for a bus tour of the SS headquarters where Göring, Bormann, and Hitler had lived, and saw the bomb shelter that was built for Hitler and his girlfriend Eva Braun. We couldn't see the eagle's nest as it was closed, but here is a picture of it up on top of the mountain. The Allies destroyed most of this area to prevent its being used as a shrine. This is a boughten slide of the eagle's nest, which is located on the mountain called Obersalzberg. Hitler particularly liked this area because he was from Salzburg. and he liked to be able to look into his old city from up above. There's a beautiful emerald green lake near Berchtesgaden called See. Here we're having an ice cream cone by the lake. Here is a lovely resort hotel by the lake. This is a typical Bavarian church that we saw in Berchtesgaden. And another typical scene is the dress of the Bavarian men. They actually do wear these leather pants in their usual dress. We thought we had toured enough for that day, but heard that the salt mines were worth a visit. So here we are, dressed for work. What a kick the kids got out of this. First we rode a train down into the salt mines. Then to get into the deeper shafts, we slid down a long wooden ramp. We had to have leather on our seats for friction. Riding a boat on the salt lake. To get salt, they fill these shafts with water, which dissolves out the salt, and then it is piped to another place for distillation. In Salzburg, with me in front of the Mozart statue, for this is his hometown. It was a lovely place, a beautiful city. The women wear dirndl skirts and low peasant blouses. We met an American family living in Pastor Hansen's first house in Copenhagen. They invited us to spend the night at their pension, which was on a farm. Dean was in ecstasy with real cows, pigs, chickens, and horses right outside of his room. This bread truck pulled up in the morning, which was a very interesting sight for all of us to see. A typical scene in Austria as we drove along. This we thought was one of the highest peaks in Austria. Notice all the snow yet. A lovely Austrian house and a typical farm with a barn attached. This is an unusually lovely house, of course, and a very large one. We figured they must have 3 or 4 families living in one house. With regrets, we left Austria for Germany. Next stop, See Castle. Now you see the castle of Mad King Ludwig II, patterned after Versailles, as he was a great admirer of Louis XIV. The hallway contains the Golden Peacock. People who had seen Versailles said that this castle was far more stupendous. The king's bedroom. The wealth of blue and gold reflected in the mirrors and the marble. Notice the Meissen porcelain and the Brussels lace. Another bedroom. That would be a nice guest room to have, wouldn't it? Most spectacular was the Hall of Mirrors. There are 44 gilded candelabras, 33 chandeliers from the ceiling. At parties, there were 4,000 candles lit all at the same time. The dining room had a particularly lovely chandelier, which was made from Dresden, China. There was only one model of it, and then it was destroyed after this piece had been made. The dining room table can be lowered to the kitchen with an elevator. This man was considered a lunatic, but he certainly had some clever and advanced ideas. There were 2 other castles that were built by him. He spent millions of dollars, and he was found drowned in 1886 before he could really enjoy these constructions. We spent several hours in Munich seeing the museum. The boys had a wonderful time pushing buttons, making dams work, and taking tours through mines. A short distance from Munich was the Dachau concentration camp, where we felt we should stop. This picture is a memorial built to the victims. Here we saw the gas chamber and the ovens, which were gruesome, but yet a part of history of World War II. It was a good introduction for us before going to Berlin. We headed north from Munich up through Nuremberg and spent a night in Celle. The next morning we headed off into East Germany. These barbed wire fences gave us the first feeling of what it's like to be confined. In addition to the barbed wire, there were dogs and sentries used to keep people from escaping. It was quite a procedure getting our visas and passes to get through the border to get into East Germany. And we were amazed at the lack of people and houses and any sign of life for 3 hours. In fact, we stopped to eat along the way, and there was no place to buy anything to drink or anything to eat. We did see 2 or 3 gasoline stations, and that was all along the Autobahn from the border of East Germany into Berlin. The highway was rather busy that day because of the truckloads of East German youths going to East Berlin for a communist youth rally. We saw more of that the next day on our tour of East Berlin, but they were transported by boxcar and trucks, just like animals. West Berlin, that you see in picture 221, was like a breath of fresh air to us after the drab, monotonous 3-hour drive through East Germany. We were amazed as we went into the downtown section, however, that there were not a lot of cars for such a big city. And the reason is that these people cannot go any place. They are practically like prisoners in their own city. This is the residential area 1 block from our hotel. It was still in ruins. Much of West Berlin still looks like this. In fact, the lot next to our hotel was completely bare, and that had at one time been a big home. We were surprised at how many of the ruins are still remaining. The reason is they have to wait for, I believe it's 20 years, until the owner claims it or is legally declared dead. For us all, but especially for Keith, to see all the bullet-scarred buildings and the large empty spaces that had once been a busy center of a city made history much more alive to him. In the center of West Berlin is the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church. This was heavily bombed during the war. They left this ruined tower as a reminder of the war. The new bell tower presents a sharp contrast on the skyline of old and new Berlin. There is quite a lot of new construction, too. The Brandenburg Gate, which is in the English section of Berlin. One roll of our pictures from here did not develop, so we were very disappointed. We had some pictures of the wall, and also on a bus trip into West Berlin in the French sector. There are areas where the wall goes right through houses and even through a church. And there are crosses on the sidewalk showing where people have jumped from the upper stories to get to freedom on the sidewalk. Many of them did not live through it. They have crushed glass along the upper sections of the wall to prevent people from escaping. And they have even put up high cardboard behind the wall so that people could not wave to each other. We took a bus tour into East Berlin. At the checkpoint Charlie, our guide left us, our West Berlin guide, because he was not allowed to go into East Berlin. And then we crossed the border, and a very militaristic-looking guard came on to the bus and checked all our passports. We were also supposed to declare the amount of money that we were taking into East Berlin. The contrast between the two cities is immediately evident. However, there was more gaiety in East Berlin this weekend because of the 500,000 youngsters who had been brought to the city. There were signs all over and communist slogans and pictures of the communist leaders. Here we're standing by the railroad station in East Berlin. In the background, you see the blue-shirted communist youths. Number 227 is a typical East Berlin scene with the policeman on the corner that reminded us a great deal of Russian guards. The building, we think, is the old railroad station, but we're not sure. You can still see the wreckage as it stands. And here are some more of the youths as they're walking through East Berlin. They did add gaiety to the otherwise dead city. This looks rather barren now, but at one time was the main government building of Berlin, and under it is the bunker where Hitler died. Here we have the Russian War Memorial. 5,000 Russian soldiers are buried here. They really took Berlin during the war. We felt we had a better picture of World War II after having seen this part of Germany. After driving over 4,000 miles with the two boys, we were very glad to get home. In fact, we drove the last day all the way from Berlin, which is over 700 kilometers. But the Autobahn goes very fast, and we made very good time. Johnny, of course, was most excited to have the boys return. Everything had gone along nicely while we were gone. Soon after we returned to Copenhagen, Harold and Gunny Peterson came to stay with us for a little while. What a wonderful time we had together. Harold sent us the following pictures. I took this picture of them as they were boarding their ship on the way to Oslo. On a Sunday afternoon, when the Petersons were here, we went up to a Bakken amusement park, where Dean enjoyed seeing the animals. He also had a ride on one of the little ponies. Then the Petersons took the boys on various rides, and we had such a nice time. This is a picture of Keith in his Boy Scout uniform. Harold went to school on a bicycle and snapped this picture of Keith with his friend in front of the classroom. There have been writing some Danish on the board, as you can see. Harold really enjoyed his riding the bicycle around the neighborhood here. Harold snapped this picture of us as we were going to church the Sunday that they were here. Soon, Myrna and Harriet arrived on the Swedish Institute tour. Our pictures have not come through, and so we've asked Myrna to include one for you to see in these pictures here. And now we have the Jordals, who came to us in August from Neillsville, Wisconsin, after spending some time in New York City and Washington, sightseeing too. This ends our slides for 1964.